Randy, I don't think I've ever heard you do a solo, man. You got a nice voice, man. I was like into that sound, man. So all of you, just beautiful, beautiful music. Thank you. You know, I'm excited to share, and also always a little bit nervous to share. Sorry, people at home. You know, I write my sermons out. It's not that I can't talk extemporaneously, because I could and probably would talk for 2 hours. But I write my sermons out to keep my thoughts concise, and because I am at a point of my life where I am making my own discoveries, which I find every time I make a discovery, someone in the church hands me a book who somebody's already made that discovery. But it's okay, it's new to me. Okay, so this morning I want to share with you some new insights. I'm starting to see Unitarian Universalism, at least my version of it, as nature, science, a bridging of nature, science, and spirituality. All interwoven, not separate disciplines, but one discipline. And when you look at life that way, interesting things begin to appear that I want to share with you. And today is all about liberation, the ultimate thing that we're all trying to get toward. Liberation of mind, body, liberation of the heart, liberation of the soul. And so I want to talk about a man who spent his life trying to find liberation. 500 years before Jesus, there was a man of color in India who went on a spiritual quest to find answers to questions he had about life. Of course, notice I said another person of color. In fact, all of the major religions in the world were started by people of color or non-European people. Now, when I tell some people, you know, that Jesus was Jewish and more than likely brown, and that Buddha was an Indian, it gives them pause because of the false construct that we live under. Interestingly, when in the church we are discussing centering people of color in our congregations, and I think this is in line with the history of the major religions: Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, Taoism. All of these great religions had founders who were not from Europe. But I digress. But context is important. Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha. I want to start there. Certainly when you read the story, it's full of myth and legend, but it's also archetypal. It's a story about human evolution, one particular human's evolution. It's about a coming-of-age narrative. Joseph Campbell might call it a hero's journey. Siddhartha is 29 years old when he leaves the life of luxury and wanders into the wilderness, living off the land. Think about the story of Moses or Jesus going into the desert or wilderness. Same story. And when you read the story, you can find yourself in the story. An individual looking for answers to questions that he or she or they have about life. And if you haven't learned anything about Buddhism and you're curious, I would recommend watching a documentary on Prime Video. It's called Buddha, and it's outstanding. It's important to know this story. There are 500 million Buddhists in the world. This one man's discovery changed the world. Siddhartha Gautama's story is a story about all of us in our search for inner peace, how we wrestle with making meaning from the destruction and inhumanity we witness. Indeed, his entire life, from living as a prince and indulging in decadence, and then later becoming a monk and experiencing the deepest despair and deprivation, it's an example, again, of how we're all struggling to find ourselves in this lifetime. And he felt like he had to go to extremes on this journey. Eventually, he became the awakened one who woke up. And he believed the world was filled with sorrow and despair, but was able to find inner peace, calm, serenity by going deep within, by facing his shadows, his dragons, his fears. He described all of this as suffering. Suffering is better understood by us today as angst, dissatisfaction, fear, uneasiness, or anxiety. You know, you can't calm down. You can't get the inner negative to shut up. You can't stop worrying. Angst. What I love about the story is that Siddhartha found his answers through his own life experiences, not someone else's conversion. He was an existentialist in that way. He learned his purpose through his experiences. And his teachings turn out to be great therapy even for us today. This brother came from royalty, as I said, but chose poverty, and it nearly killed him. He went to the bitter edge of starvation because he had learned from the ascetic Vedic priest before he followed his own sort of message. He learned these techniques for finding answers through deprivation of the body, with long hours of meditation, no food, no water, sitting outside, freezing, sitting in the rain. They believed that higher states of consciousness could be attained by depriving the body over long periods, and what we know now is that this is true. We also know that we can create altered states of consciousness through drugs like psilocybin. In fact, Johns Hopkins has carefully monitored studies today that use mushrooms to cure patients of addiction, trauma, and severe anxiety. This modality will become a part of modern medicine sooner than later. The magic is that when we allow the mind to let go, we're able to access higher forms of consciousness or connection. We're able to let go, to relax, to be fully present. That's what happened with the Buddha. On the other side, we also know that altered states of awareness can be achieved through hedonism. When groups get tribal, like the football I'm going to watch later on. And they form teams, or they go to war. Even sex can raise our awareness towards something bigger, albeit toward a way of seeing others that is normally exclusive, narcissistic, and tribal, as I said. But the Buddha did not find his answer to suffering and anxiety, uneasiness, through deprivation, because extremes lead to extremes. Extremes destroy life. But, ironically, that close contact with death did open him up to have a sort of near-death experience. He found his answer to suffering when he decided not to be extreme after being extreme. We do that. And he made a decision to live. And it was that decision to live, sitting under a tree in nature, very important, sitting under a tree in nature, in the natural world, outside. The answers began coming to him. Choosing to live, he remembered all of a sudden a joyful experience with his father at a spring planting festival, just watching the ladies dance and celebrate the agriculture of the time and how fun it was for him as a kid. He remembered. He remembered watching some insects dance and move majestically, doing what they do. He saw a pattern in the process. He saw organization. He saw oneness. And he also saw them those same insects get stepped on by a passerby. And that made him sad. Oh, destruction. Life gives and takes away. But he then saw the insects reorganize and continue their process. Oh, nature is resilient. It's all fleeting. He saw the awful and the awesome, a dance of continuity under the tree, connected to everything. He saw and understood the underlying workings of nature, including human nature, the permanence and impermanence. There is joy in brokenness. That's a quote from the Buddha. He chose to live that day. And mysteriously, after making that choice, a young maiden comes to him and serves him food that he decides, I want to live, I'm going to eat. And it turns out to be a dish that he ate as a child. Oh, life is special that way. The synchronicity. When you choose life, life says, okay, yes, oh, I'm familiar with this. Another affirmation that I made the right choice. It's a real story of struggling with life, but now awakened, he realizes that the middle way is the best of all options. He was wound too tightly, trying to search. I got to find this. Man, I got to find. You never find it. He just wound too tight. He let go. Today we call the middle way in science homeostasis. But what I love about the Buddha and Buddhism is that it is a very humanistic religion. I also love that the Buddha was egalitarian. When he opened the Sangha, he allowed women to join as equals. He said no to the caste system. He taught that all, my favorite part, all were becoming Buddhas. All were destined to awaken. That all, one day in this life or some reincarnated lifetime, will make peace with their fear and anxiety, aging, illness, and death. All the things that cause suffering. That one day all would reconcile that. Beautiful, universalistic. And he said we transcend suffering by transcending desire. He taught that nirvana, heaven, is inside and manifests outside. That nirvana was the completion of your life-death cycle of rebirth. A flower has blossomed, it has completed its purpose. But he also broke with the traditions of his time. I said he was egalitarian. Back then, the Vedic tradition was male-centric, ritualistic, and full of long, formulaic meditations. And again, all within a caste system that favored men. And many of the men who taught him the Vedic meditation techniques, eventually listening to him and watching his conversion, became his followers. They saw a man reborn in their own eyes. His originality was infectious, be original. And his way was simple, it was fresh. Keep it simple. In fact, in Buddha's time, the world, we always think our time, oh, this is the worst time in history. Actually, in the Buddhist time, the world was very similar. People were losing interest in the traditional religious practices. That would be Hinduism. Poverty was rampant, still is in India. Economic and social injustices. People were using violence to maintain the caste system, keep people in their place. And this guy emerges, middle way, moderation, some meditation. Living means suffering. To end suffering, end desire. Now I want to translate that. If you want to relieve your anxiety, stop being a control freak. See the bigger picture. And then let go of the responsibility for it all. good therapy, especially when it begins to consume you. Let it go. Pick it up again when you can engage with it with a middle perspective. Because when you're in the forest, you can't always see the trees. Take some steps back. Look as if you're on a high building if you need perspective, or in an airplane, and see the unity, see the oneness. And do it all with compassion, he said. Do no harm. Ahimsa. Be nonviolent, walk mindfully and meditatively. So simple, harder to practice. Why be nonviolent? Because all beings have a spark of the divine. They are you. You are nature. You are looking at yourself. Ahimsa. When we do harm to others, we do harm to ourselves. Because all have worth and dignity. That's you. All are interconnected. That's you. Every person you meet on the journey is you. They will eventually be Buddhas too. That one's hard. Right. Him too? Your illusion of separateness is why you suffer. Your anxiousness and angst are because you are trying to power through things that are probably out of your control. 2,500 years ago. And by the way, if your strings are strung too tightly, he said, if you're clinging to fundamentalism of any kind, my translation, you won't hear nor understand this message. He said this, fair goes the dancing when the sitar is tuned. Tune us the sitar neither high nor low, and we will dance away the hearts of men. But the string too tight breaks and the music dies. The string too slack has no sound and the music dies. There is a middle way. Tune us the sitar neither low nor high, and we will dance away the hearts of men. Now, I have to admit, I think this is an advanced kind of spirituality. When you experience the highs and lows in life and are not vengeful or spiteful, when you move toward acceptance, looking at things honestly and objectively, you begin to see that much of life is gray, hence what I have on today. Not necessarily black or white. Much of what you see as conflict is fear and misunderstood perceptions. So when I say it's an advanced level of spirituality, it's because you transcend the dichotomy. And you know life is living, managing ambiguity. The gray is interesting because you take a religion like Taoism and you see Taoism says, here's black and here's white, this or that. There's a little bit of each in the other with the small circles. But I like to say if you spin it around really fast, you get gray. Now, if you're creative, God then is both the circle on the left and the right. We are also both. We are spinning really fast, but we're also spinning really slowly, and we can see and tell the black from the white. But truly, they are one. And the source of life, that intelligent energy, understands things from within and beyond. And the Buddha says, you are that source. Thou art that. You have the same consciousness, the same capacity to see things in a larger context. And when you and if you have this breakthrough, you can't knowingly do harm to others. Compassion drives your life. When you've risen above us versus them, you know that what you do to others, you do to yourself. You know that violence is primitive and for, and I'll say this, a lesser evolved soul. You know this. And as the Buddha did, you begin to see the underlying workings of nature. You see all of life as a Fibonacci sequence. Life is math, patterns, cycles that add up to our evolvement. You study this picture on the screen, you can see that the circle starts small and opens up. And as it opens up, it expands into larger spheres. A Unitarian said, onward and outward forever, onward and upward forever, like a spinning galaxy. You can look up the Fibonacci sequence if you want to learn the simple math. But as you know, it's everywhere in nature. That's what the Buddha was seeing. He was seeing a Fibonacci sequence. He was seeing a pattern. Nature's DNA. There is intelligence there. A flower must bloom. A seed becomes what its DNA says it must become. A caterpillar becomes a butterfly. Things become what they're destined to become. Human beings. Well, Buddha said they're destined to be Buddhas. Destined to live at a high level of awareness, sensitivity, and compassion, and love. Humans are destined to evolve beyond the primitive animal nature towards a new species that has not fully been defined yet. Amen. And Barbara Max Hubbard, who you heard in the reading, she says, the stories of the myths and gods, goddesses, the stories of the angels and all of the sages who've come and enlightened human beings, walk the earth. She says, how do you know that that's not a future version of us, evolved, a transhuman species that has gone beyond time and space? But that's why I love her. She's so bold. She recently died at age 90, just the most positive soul. You can see her soul in every one of her books, just such a lovely lady. And she sees human beings on an evolutionary journey, opening up like a flower in bloom. Now, we're in the black and the white. We can't see that as well, right? So you have to take a macrocosmic look to see it. A look at history, a look at science, and you can see it. It might be naive to say it with all of the suffering and despair that we see every day, but I tell you, I see it. And next week, I want to show again how we are becoming less violent. We are moving toward nonviolence. It doesn't feel that way, but we are. We're the least violent we have been in the history of humanity. And we are becoming awakened even more through technology. Think about it. We survived as Homo sapiens. Our big brains expand. Something magical happened there, giving us these godlike powers to create or destroy. Amazing, superior survival skills to persist in the toughest conditions. We ascended to the top of the food chain. We've made it through cataclysmic events. It seems that we are evolving to something larger, something greater. I do not believe humanity is destined for ultimate destruction. I believe that some better version of us will continue. A kinder, gentler version. A good book on this is the book Sapiens. Then there's gene editing technology. Have you seen that? There's 4 companies now. They can fix genetic mutations in the human genome. We will see implemented in our lifetime, some of our lifetime, my lifetime, I believe, the ability to rid the world of maladies like cancer and sickle cell. Major things happening. God-like powers. And yes, it opens up a lot of questions like who gets access to this life-altering technology, who controls it. But we are becoming God-like in our human capacities. Onward and outward we go in our Fibonacci sequence. Barbara Marx Hubbard says we're going to ascend to heights we can't even imagine, to extending life toward a kind of eternal life if we choose that. Moving toward a more global and borderless galactic humanity, Star Trek-like. It's naive, again, thinking about the massive injustices and white supremacy and environmental dangers. But she says it is at that edge of disaster when humans take giant steps forward. Pandemics, world wars, drought, we humans have managed to thrive when faced with hardship. You know, we are like that kid who doesn't prepare for the test and crams the night before and still gets an A, or at least a B. He passes, or she. That's humanity. We will make enough of the right decision to progress. And she says, which I love, that we're about at the 21 on that spiral. My favorite number. So if you look at that, we're moving away into the gray, into the ambiguity, into a place where we're going to be able to understand things at a much greater level. That we are co-creators, co-conspirers in this world, in this universe. When I awaken, all awaken, Buddha said. He knew that since we're all connected, his insight would eventually become humanity's insight. We are all becoming Buddhas. Dear friends, keep moving toward your liberation by trying your best to do no harm, by encouraging others to do the same. And of course, remember the Buddha's lesson to keep things simple, all things in moderation. Avoid the extremes in everything to better manage your highs and lows. And when you are caught up in fear and forget his wisdom, and you will, just remember to loosen the strings of the instrument. Find your way back to unconditional love, because that's what in the gray, that's unconditional love. That is acceptance. And acceptance is liberation. And liberation is nirvana. Amen.